Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, February 28th, 2022. I'm actually very happy to be with you tonight, to see all your welcoming names tuning in. So glad to have you. Tonight's broadcast is on the role of the field guide in wilderness therapy. And like all of my broadcasts, I'll do some teaching about a certain idea, principle, skill, approach, concept. But I want to make sure that it has application to parenting. What can we learn from the role of the field guide? What role are they serving in the field? Who are they? Why are they so effective? And then can we extrapolate from those ideas? Can we extrapolate concepts that help us in our parenting? Before I get into that, I want to talk about an upcoming event. This is a new offering. Even though our live viewers are typically all parents from our wilderness therapy program, there are a lot of listeners, of course, that aren't. So this may be more for them. But on May 26th from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., we are going to be hosting a masterclass on attachment-based therapy. This is geared toward therapists and those who work in a therapeutic setting. I've been asked by many if it's appropriate for a parent to sign up. And my answer is absolutely. If you want to learn more, if you want to get a greater depth, a greater understanding into this approach, Evoke's approach to therapy, then you're welcome to attend. What I won't have the time to do and won't really make a concerted effort to do on a regular basis during this broadcast is how it applies to parenting. Contrary to the thing I just said about these broadcasts, this is geared toward therapists. But if you're interested, that's fine. If you are a therapist or you're a therapeutic staff or you work in a therapeutic setting, this is an opportunity to learn about transference, countertransference, to really learn about what holds therapy together. You know, when we talk about the research and therapeutic approaches, there's really one variable that is the greatest predictor, and that's how passionate, present the therapist is and how safe the client feels with the therapist. That idea of the therapist bringing their authentic self and the client feeling safe in it is the greatest predictor of whether or not the therapy is successful. In attachment-based therapy, the idea of what do we do? How do we create an attachment experience in psychotherapy that can be a reparative experience for the wounding that every human being experiences as a child growing up. So I'm it's actually my favorite thing to do, probably in life, is to teach about psychotherapy. So I'm really excited for that. May 26th, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. It's $250, and we'll be offering certificates for 6 continuing education credits. So if that interests you, contact intensives or contact professionals at evoketherapy.com for more information or to register. So tonight, the role of the field guide. I've said this many times in the past, but when I walked into the wilderness therapy group for the first time in 1996, it was March or April of 1996, not knowing virtually anything about wilderness therapy, I was struck in my first days by 2 really powerful experiences. And the first was that the people who do this work, specifically the field guides that go out in the case of the programs I've worked at, from Tuesday morning to the following Tuesday evening, and spend their time in the wilderness trying to help young people, that these people are remarkable individuals, a different kind of animal than I was used to encountering in the world, different kind of person. These are kind-hearted, patient, humble, eager, resilient, and resourceful people. For them to choose a job that not only has the challenges of dealing with children who are struggling with mental health and addiction issues, but to do it in the context and in the delivery method of wilderness therapy was an amazing thing to witness. The second thing I noticed, and I just put this on here, even though it doesn't necessarily relate specifically to tonight's, was that teens, that the clients in the program were much more resilient than they or their parents thought they were. But that was the order of my first impressions of wilderness therapy. So let's talk about the field guide. Sometimes we've talked about them in terms of being a field instructor or a field staff. Tonight, in our current language, is referring to them as a field guide. You might hear me slip throughout the course of the broadcast, but I'll do my best to stay consistent. The role of the field guide is a unique role in the field of mental health treatment and wilderness therapy. The primary role of the guide is to serve as a mentor, not a therapist. The field guide is tasked with the daily duties of creating safety and mentoring. The mentor is a model that provides the treatment team with a worm's eye view of the student's week. Sometimes field guides show up on your parent phone calls, your weekly updates, and you're not hearing a clinically conceptualized description of your child. You're hearing the description of what their behavior, how they showed up for the week. We take that information if the field guide doesn't end up on any of the phone calls, because that's not a usual thing. But we take that information that we get from them, and that's the information that we give to you as parents. The field guide sits somewhere between a parent and a sibling in terms of their hierarchy. And from such a position, they can more easily gain access to the client's inner world. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that letters written by siblings that say virtually the same things that parent letters say are able to reach the client more effectively often than the letters written by the parents. There's something about that role of being a parent that the child is developmentally designed. It's unfolding in their DNA to rebel against, to individuate from. So this field guide occupies this middle space. Resistance may be lowered. Resistance in the client may be lowered due to the relative position of the guide compared to the therapist, parent, or other authority figures. They don't look like, I often say it tongue in cheek, they don't look like, smell like, sound like us older adults, us parents. They look a little counterculture. These are people, again, that have chosen a job that many of us, not all of us, but many of us would find to be an overwhelming challenge. And because of the type of people that are attracted to wilderness living, they already occupy a counterculture position that is more identifiable for teens. These are people that have chosen not to go into an office, that have chosen not to wear a suit, that have chosen not to follow the conservative path, perhaps, that their parents or society has laid out for them. Again, that puts them in a position to be able to teach the values and lessons that you want your children to learn from a position that doesn't threaten or provoke the defense of the child. I'll mention this later, but when we've done research, asking clients, alumni clients, what made the biggest difference, the number one thing that they identified was the field guides and their relationship to them. Second was the challenge, and third or fourth was the therapist. The therapist came lower on that list. Now, parents put a lot of weight into the therapist because they're the window into the program. They're the one communicating with the parents on a regular basis. But it's really those field guides are where the proverbial rubber meets the road in this treatment process. Who are these field guides? They're sometimes extreme adventurous, nature-loving people. People that most often when we ask them during their orientation, why did you get this job? A good portion of them will say that they found their own healing, their own peace in the solitude of nature. These are folks often that, again, are approaching healing from a holistic perspective, a mind, body, spirit perspective, from a mindfulness perspective, the kind of mindfulness that being in nature offers. Many of them are curious about becoming therapists. One of the things that Evoke changed when it came on the scene in the late 90s was really putting the clinical conceptual, the clinical ideas, the clinical work into wilderness therapy. And so since then, we've seen an increase over the years with people that are looking at this. They have to, of course, love nature and be comfortable in the wilderness. But these are people that want to be a therapist. And I can tell you this. I don't think there's any greater training to become a therapist than being a field guide. There are not many settings, hospitals, psychiatric wards, residential treatment centers, therapeutic boarding schools, small group living, halfway houses. The list could go on. There aren't many where you're both trained and equipped with tools, skills, and ideas, but also you have to solve problems on the fly in real time. You have to problem solve. You have to figure out how to execute the treatment plan. Madison, one of our assistant field directors, wrote to me today, and she said, we have plenty of people who have experience in outdoor education guiding, as well as those who have studied a bachelor program in college. We also have people who come to us from a wide variety of other careers, who have mostly spent time outdoors as a way to pursue their own healing in their free time. Rather than having previously made a career of outdoor education, we also have a variety of ages amongst our field guides, which provides a nice balance of varied perspectives for the students to be able to connect with and learn from. Essentially, there is no one path, no one profile that our guides come to us from. And I've often experienced this being hugely beneficial for the students and having various humans in the field that have had different life experiences to be able to connect with. I'm so proud to work with these field guides, and I'm going to say something fairly bold. What Madison is saying is absolutely true. My experience also, that there's a different kind of person who's willing to head out into the wilderness with a group of 7, 8, or 9 clients and live with them uninterrupted for 8 days and try to promote health and healing in that context than somebody that's willing to work 8-hour shifts at a hospital or a residential treatment center close by. And I think it's self-evident when you realize that these folks go in for 8-day shifts. And that 8-day shift, and I'll mention it a few times tonight, that cannot be underestimated. When you have an 8-day shift, you have time. The week becomes its own one long therapy session. It's not accurate or helpful to pull out one incident, one event, one afternoon, and to make sense of it out of the context of the rest of the week. And so they have time. It's also something where the students have to work it out. Every parent has seen their child split adults. Splitting is what it's referred to. Pitting the good cop against the bad cop, pitting the teacher at school against mom or dad, or vice versa. Everybody's seen that to some extent. But when you have an 8-day shift, you have to work it out. You can't hide. It's harder to fall through the cracks. It's harder to hold your breath and wait for the good staff, the nice staff to come on shift. It's a really, really critical part of this. One of the most I get asked this all the time, especially skeptics of wilderness therapy or newcomers, novices to wilderness therapy. This idea of the therapist is only out there for a couple of days a week. Shouldn't they have more therapy? Even sometimes the students, the clients will play that note to parents in letters and on phone calls saying, I wish I had more therapy. And I love this quote. I love this next quote because I think it says it more poetically than I can describe it, by Claude Debussy, the famous composer. He said, music is the space between the notes. Mozart said a little different. He said, music is not the notes. It's the space in between the notes. And others have said very similar things. Therapy is the space in between the sessions. I've told the story of leaving the field for my first vacation back in 1996 and feeling such ownership and feeling this paternal feeling toward my clients, worried about if they would be okay without me. And back then, for many years, we didn't have therapists come in and cover. We saw the field guides and the wilderness experience as therapy enough that we didn't have to augment it with having a therapist who would just work with them for 1 week come in. So I left for a week. I came back. I remember meeting Joe Katinik, who's now a therapist in wilderness therapy, not ours. He's worked for us for a little while, but he's somewhere else. And I remember saying to Joe, how was the week? And he said to me, best week the kids have ever had. Of course, I felt a little bit hurt by that. Thought I was a little bit more important to the process than that. But again, it started to teach me that it's the wilderness and the guides, the mentoring, the experiences that they have that really do the work. Sometimes when students ask for therapy, it's because they're comfortable in therapy. Because therapy and therapists become the gatekeepers for home and for transitioning out of the program. And so they're eager for that experience in session to impress. I myself love being a client in psychotherapy. I've said this many times. I'm easily seduced by a client who's a very good therapy client. I love somebody who talks about deep insights and epiphanies and ideas in psychotherapy. But putting them into practice is what differentiates wilderness therapy. I love this story from a former employee of mine. He worked with us for years as a wellness therapist, and then he worked at a residential treatment center. And sometime later, a couple of years later, he came back to work as a wilderness therapist. And because of the timing of things, he brought 2 students with him from the therapeutic boarding school. The parents, the consultants, the program itself thought it would be best if, because they were near the end of their stay, if they just came back. His name was David. If they just came back with David to our program and finished up their work in the wilderness. And David told this story of one of his first weeks back with a difficult, resistant client that he had seen for 18 months or so. And in the session, the client was putting up that wall, was pushing him away, it was in a power struggle. And David just simply said after a few moments of the session, I don't have to do this with you. I can just meet with you next week. And the student said, no, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk to you. I want to finish this. And he became more open. The experience of being in wilderness therapy and the work that the guides do every day, that's the secret sauce of all of this. I say to our therapists all the time, don't pat yourself on the back too much in wilderness therapy. Being a therapist in wilderness therapy is kind of easy. It's kind of a cheat or a hack because you have so many resources, both the wilderness living and also the field guides, to support the process, to execute the treatment plan. Like I said, the students, the clients have to work through their issues with the guides during their shifts. They can't hold their breath for the next 8-hour shift to come. The staff tend to be less scripted, right? Less formal than the therapists, more intuitive and natural, and more human and accessible because of that. You know, they're telling stories from their life. I've talked to staff over the years, hundreds of staff, and when I train them, I say to them, "What's your interest? What's your greatest hobby or interest in life? What's your bliss? What can you do that makes the time pass by like it's going in minutes instead of hours? You find you've been working on something for hours. Tell that story. You know, bring that to the client. They don't have to fall in love with Tai Chi or punk rock music like you have, or climbing, rock climbing, so common to our field stuff. They don't have to fall in love with what you fall in love with, but they will. That feeling of being in love with life is contagious. And so, yes, we're going to give you some basic structure. We're going to give you some basic parameters. We're going to give you a treatment plan for each child each week. We're going to connect with you midweek at least once, and anytime you need help or assistance or feedback or new ideas. We're going to do all of that. But underneath all of that is you and what you bring to the table and your non-threatening position. They are in charge of daily monitoring of safety and hygiene and wilderness skills. There's something that happens when a mentor teaches you about something. And our clients and our students need to be taught about wilderness living. How to pack their pack so it's comfortable and rests lighter on their shoulders and on their hips. How to tie knots, how to build a shelter, where to build a shelter, where to face the shelter, everything that's involved in wilderness living. And when the staff occupies a position of teaching you in one area, it automatically lends itself a little bit to teaching in other areas. If you were on a soccer team, you're more apt to listen to your coach if your coach is a good coach. You're more apt to listen to your coach teach you about life skills intermixed with teaching you about soccer or football. So that role of mentoring in the context of wilderness skills and wilderness living lends itself very well to the other teaching. It also establishes a sense of hierarchy, natural, not dominance, not power struggle, not what they call in the literature strict father families, which is really just talking about what we call now a patriarchal system, but an appropriate balance, an appropriate, you're the student, you're the client, you're the child, they're the adult. It establishes that. What I love about the field staff, field guides often is they start to play the same role that you do. The same struggles that you have with your child are the same struggles that they have with your children. So what that looks like, we were also the first program to decide this in around 2000. It wasn't happening before we started. And even when we started, we didn't do it right away. But we decided in around the year 2000 that the rule would be that the field guides would attend a session with the person that they were in charge of, the client that they were in charge of for the week. They would attend the session every week if they were on shift. Sometimes it was at the end of their shift, if it was on a Tuesday, for example, or sometimes it was on the beginning of their shift. It was on a Wednesday. They start on Tuesday mornings and go to the following Tuesday evening, as I mentioned. And both of those perspectives give advantages, right? Having a field guide present after having just spent 8 days with your child gives us a lot of material. But having a field staff present on the front end of their shift also gives them a good sense about the work that the child is doing. A lot of times what I would just say to the guide after a session is I would just say, did you see how I approached the issue about writing letters or doing his or her assignments or the issues that they were having with authority figures or their parents? Did you see how I was approaching that? That's what I want you to do with them this week. It also makes the therapist more accountable. But like I mentioned, think about this. Think about this. If you're interested or you know somebody that might be interested in being a guide, there aren't very many times that you get to sit in real time in a therapy session and observe it. That's extraordinarily rare. And not just 1 week, but week after week after week with all of the clients under your charge. And from that vantage point, you learn more about psychotherapy than you would from a book. I mean, this is the way that in the old world, as they say, this is the way that we taught people. An apprentice trained under a master. That's where the term master's degree comes from. And the apprentice learned even with the hard sciences like medicine. You learn to be a doctor by sitting at the side of a doctor and learning with each surgery, with each operation, with each procedure, how to do it long before universities formalize the educational process. So these field guides they talk about this all the time. When they leave us because they want to go to college or, it takes a toll on you physically to be outside for years on end. When they go back to the city or they go back to other parts of the country and they still want to work in a therapeutic setting, so they go to the nearest residential treatment center, a therapeutic school or program. And inevitably they will tell us that it feels like babysitting compared to what they had to do in wilderness therapy. And those programs, believe me, they want the field guides. They want to recruit them because they know, again, these folks are dynamic, unique people with a passion for life and helping, but also who have been trained in ways that very few people get trained. If I could have been a field guide before I became a psychotherapist, before I graduated from graduate school, I would have been years ahead of where I was in graduate school. And in those contexts, started to say this earlier, we kind of do a version of family therapy with the guide. I love teaching the guide to apologize when they make a mistake, when they snap at a client, when they're sarcastic or short with a client. In a perfect world, which does not exist, I would like them to make no mistakes, but that doesn't exist. So we use them in that role. We do family therapy where the field guide is a stand-in for mom and dad, less identified with the child, right? And therefore less threatened by the feedback, the failures, the mistakes, the shortcomings. And we use them in a family systems way to talk about the relationship. And then we extrapolate that to the parents. So much of this is about getting past resistance. And if you can get past resistance, the work is quite easy. It's the resistance to psychotherapy that's the difficulty. But you, as parents, if you have a child in this process, you already know that. You might not be using that word. But part of what you will say to me when I talk to you is, I just want them to learn X, Y, or Z. I just want them to listen to wisdom, to not have to learn every lesson in life the hard way. So they're with them from Tuesday to Tuesday. It starts off with an in-service. In-service includes both training from the senior field guides, from the directors in the field department, but also from the therapists every week. And both shifts, the blue shift and the green shift, both shifts get the same trainings. After that, they take a truck right out to the field, working on weekly goals and intentions. They get all of they upload all of the old information from the outgoing staff. They also bring them some snacks from the front country. They participate and facilitate the Milan group. The Milan group is based on a concept from the Milan School of Family Therapy in Milan, Italy, that was happening in the 70s and 80s. I took this term because one of the interventions that they had at the Milan School was they would do a family session, and behind the one-way mirror would be a group of therapists watching the session. And then at some point, the family would go behind the one-way mirror, and all the clinicians would come out and talk about the family. They would conceptualize about what they're seeing, and the family could learn. Milan group, that staff exchange of information group, that's the Milan. So the outgoing staff are giving reports. Each staff member is assigned to 2, 3, or maybe 4, depending upon who they are and what the staff configuration is like. 3 is a typical caseload. They're assigned 3 to be primarily in charge of for that week, for their daily goals, their daily hygiene, their assignments, their weekly goals and objectives from the therapist, and they give the weekly report. Other staff will chime in as needed, and the incoming staff member who's been assigned to the child is taking notes, taking the notes from them, taking the carbon copied treatment plans that the therapists write. We ask them to hold on to 2 weeks versus the treatment plans at all times for each of the children that they're specifically in charge of. And then they spend that first night and then those next 7 after that with the clients. They go from Wednesday to Monday, and then the field guides are met by the therapists who come out Tuesday, spend 2 days in the group. The size of the group, gender, therapists attached to the group, milieu, ongoing enrollment, and graduation, all of these are fluctuating. They learn to empower the students over their time, to lead hikes, take on chores, cook meals, check in, etc. Again, it's a mentoring. I've said this before. Outpatient therapy, and again, if you have a child with us, you know this. Outpatient therapy for adolescents is really painstaking in terms of its progress. Therapy is hard, no matter who you are, no matter what age you are. But if you're a teenager and you're being compelled to go to psychotherapy, low motivation, outpatient therapy, it's really, really difficult. In many cases at home, I prefer a mentoring relationship. Somebody that spends time doing activities or shopping or life skills. And in the context of that relationship, the lessons are taught, the stories are told. So in wilderness therapy, we combine both the value and overarching conceptualization of a qualified therapist in the context of a wilderness small group living situation with a mentoring relationship. It's the, I talk about in one of my books, the grocery store lecture, as opposed to the sit down in front of your child and ask them how they're doing and give them a lecture kind of discussion, but rather, have a conversation in the grocery store. And in between small, short little snippets of time or conversation, send them off to go get some milk in the other aisle. Tell them that you missed some noodles back on the noodle aisle. Break it up. Make it less intimidating. Make it less threatening. So the therapy that happens on the hike, the discussions that happen on the hike, are every bit as valuable as the sessions that happen once a week with the therapist and that the groups that the therapists run. The field guides are also running groups every day, formal groups assigned by the staff and part of the overall standard operating procedure in wilderness therapy, but they're also handling spontaneous groups, problem solving, conflict resolution, calling groups to organize, to work through something in real time. They're facilitating the day, the meals, the hygiene management, the hiking, the personal time, MFT, which stands for mandatory fun time, hard skills, soft skills busting, etc. Mandatory busting sessions and so forth. They're not really therapists, like I mentioned. They're more like probably the closest application or closest title would be a psych tech that you would find in a psychiatric hospital. But again, they have qualities and experiences and willingnesses that folks in those roles don't have. And because it's out there, yes, we are a satellite phone call away with any emergency or any question that they might have, but they don't want to call every day for everything. So they learn by doing, they learn by practice. You might hear the term DAPS, DAPS. It stands for a particular piece of paperwork that's required by the state, that's referred to as the daily assessment and plan. It has hygiene and basic emotional safety checklists for the staff to check off each day, so that they make sure that the child is hydrating, the child is free from frostbite or frost nip, that they're not getting sunburn, having irritations, that they're tending to any blisters that they might feel from their hikes from their boots. And the staff that's assigned to be the DAPS for Johnny or Susie, that staff is considered the DAPS, the one whose primary responsibility it is to manage and execute the treatment plan. They monitor safety. You know the adage, everybody knows this, that if everybody's in charge of everybody, nobody's in charge. But if you're in charge of those 3 clients, those 3 students, and nobody else has a primary charge for those 3 students, you're more likely to get things done. Like I said, they sit on sessions. I will tell this to anybody interested in the job. It's a difficult job, and I just don't know another job where you learn and grow so much personally. And I think of it when I'm teaching the staff, when I'm having our staff conferences out in the field or in service, I'm teaching them things that you guys are learning, you parents are learning. I'm teaching them about attachment. I'm teaching them about defenses, about power struggles, about their hidden unconscious agendas. I'm training them to create a reparative experience, a reparative attachment experience. Like I said, they facilitate and execute the treatment plan. They each have a primary responsible over a few children for the week. They facilitate daily groups and impromptu groups, which are often referred to as standing groups. They give the weekly report during the staff exchange and the therapist visit. And like I said, these 8-day shifts allow for better oversight and greater cohesion due to the staff shift changes. Field guides combine direction from the therapist treatment team with their own intuitive gifts and experiences. Because of the long shifts, they must learn to think on their feet and solve complex and nuanced issues on the fly. They can check their observations and interventions with the therapist at the midweek check-in or as needed. their human side will be exposed due to the elements that they're facing and the fact that they're living in close, uninterrupted proximity to the clients. When I have served as a staff or served in the role of a staff, still being the therapist in my group, it is a different kind of pace, a different kind of pattern. You have to pace yourself because you can't as a therapist act like a therapist for 8 straight days interrupted. First of all, it's too painful and difficult for the therapist. But the therapy itself would lose its value and meaning if it were all on all the time. I've learned this in my own therapy and outpatient therapy. I think I've told this story many times where after leaving a session, having been validated by my nurturing, attachment-based therapist for an entire hour to say something difficult or scary to my wife, and feeling by the end of that hour completely regulated and calm and courageous. But in the short drive from my therapist's office, back when I would see her in person instead of virtually, in the short drive between her office, the 20-minute drive between her office and home, I would often lose my courage. And I realized one day, getting off the I-215 4500 Street exit, it's the stuff in between the therapy that really challenges you. I'm going to have to do this thing scared. I'm going to use the new programming, right? The new software to override the hardware, my inclinations, my entrenched patterns, my neurology, really, my neural pathways. I'm going to use the new teachings, the new awareness, and do the thing I have to do scared. Do it even though it's uncomfortable. So again, my point being, it's the stuff in between the sessions that is the richest part of this experience. And the field staff play the central role in that daily in between the session time with our clients. Some requirements to let you know: they must be able to clear state and federal background check. That's obviously the baseline. Minimum of 21 years of age for full-time participants, 19 years of age for summer or seasonal for our Entrada base. They have to have first aid certifications and CPR. That's a requirement. Each group will have a wilderness first responder or an EMT or wilderness EMT certification. So we prefer them to have it, and every group has one of those present all the time. It is a qualification required of a senior instructor, a level 3 instructor, and every group has at least one level 3 instructor all the time. They have to have a high school diploma or equivalent. A bachelor's degree is in a related field or equivalent amount of relevant experience is preferred. We've had master's degrees. Like I said, we've had therapists in training do the job. But those are the minimums. They must be comfortable with the wilderness. Professional wilderness experience is preferred. It's not necessary to have therapeutic training, as we do all of our accompanying training. To be completely transparent with you, and this goes for our therapists too, most of the training is on the evoke method, the attachment-based method, which is not a common method in our field, in the field of mental health, where we realize, if you want to book a reference, think of Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick, a fantastic book that places the responsibility for the progress in therapy and for the resistance or the lack of it, principally on the shoulders of the therapist or the therapeutic staff. So we train them in not provoking the defense, not rushing in when the child is feeling upregulated or threatened or uncomfortable or defensive, not, as my therapist likes to say, stealing their crutches, but rather helping repair the knee in this metaphor, this analogy. And once the knee is repaired, they'll get rid of the crutch themselves, because crutches take a great deal, as any of you who've ever used them who've needed them and used them for any length of time know, They take and require a great amount of energy, as does the defense. So we do this training with them in real time. We do it with our therapists, but we also do it with our field guides. If concerned about acquiring items like backpacks or sleeping bags before attending the orientation, the recruiters can help with that if we have some of these on hand to borrow during their orientation. I remember my first time I went out. I know nothing about camping. I grew up in Southern California. I barely had a winter jacket growing up. I would get one for a trip that we were going on. We didn't have a lot of money. So I would buy one for a trip maybe and wear it on a trip to a cold location. And by the time that I needed it for the next adventure into cold, I'd outgrown it. So I brought this cloth flannel, not waterproof sleeping bag to my first day in Wilderness Therapy. And they kindly, without laughing too much, just told me to leave that in the car and gave me the kind of gear that we provide for the staff and for the students, the kind of gear that we provide for the students that we make available to the staff if needed during orientation and also for purchase at steep discounts from our professional connections in the wilderness gear industry. So I mentioned there are 5 levels. The level 5 is a mentor. Level 5 is not really working with the students directly. They're going around mentoring other mentors, mentoring the staff. Level 4 is somebody who's been with us for a long time. Level 3 is that senior instructor. Each level, from level 1 to 5, has different assignments, clinical, different wilderness assignments, different medical trainings. We provide stipends for our staff to get trainings, clinically, wilderness-based, medically, from other services outside of Evoke as needed. Every group has at least one senior capable of leading a field guide team. Each level requires more hard skills and soft skills as well as medical training, like I mentioned. And each group will have at least one level of a wilderness first responder or its equivalent. They have to have a comfort. But if you're stressed out, if you're overwhelmed by the rain, by the snow, by the heat, by the bugs, by the primitive living, you're not going to be able to do your job. So you're going to have some baseline of comfort in wilderness therapy. Like I said, there's further medical training available to move up the levels. Clinical skills are learned on the job through mentoring and senior staffing. So as we staff a group, we might have a level 4, a level 2, a level 1, and an intern. They have a 21-day internship process before they're even allowed to count as numbers for supervision. They're not even counted as a field guide officially until they've had 21 days in our program outside wilderness living. So you would have like a 4, 2, 1, and an intern in the group. So you're learning from the therapist, from the trainings, from the in-service, from the books, from all of the training materials that we provide, but you're also learning from your field guides that are your senior instructors that are senior to you. And feedback in our program, feedback at Evoke is ubiquitous. We expect and require feedback on a constant basis. And what I love about it, and my partner, Rick Heiser, our executive director, has really been the one over the decades that has pushed this and emphasized this and underscored this. If you're not in the practice of giving regular feedback, even when you think it's no big deal or it's not necessary or it doesn't rise to the level of a concern, you're less likely to give the feedback in those times when it's really needed. So we give feedback and receive feedback all the time. Even myself, when I show up, get feedback from the field guides. Give feedback to the field guides. They give it to each other on a daily basis. They give it to each other after each cycle, is what they refer to, like dinner cycle or afternoon study cycle, right? Each period of time. They're constantly giving feedback to each other, listening to feedback. They're getting written feedback by the end of the week. And on the drive-in, along with their new treats that they've been given from the incoming staff that they're eating, they spend time giving each other, processing the week, and giving each other feedback. Communication skills training is everybody's given that. Understanding the basics of therapeutic facilitation is a part of their weekly training. And like I said, I tell the staff, bring your bliss. your unique gifts to the store and your story to the work. Yes, we will train you. Yes, we have a standard program, but the flavor that you bring to it is maybe more infectious and every bit as important as all of that. And like I said, it's the best training to become a therapist that I've ever seen. So what are the take homes? For you guys, it's to realize that therapy, therapeutic change is less in the formal moments with children than it is in the relationship. You see, we parents, especially we parents who have children who are struggling with mental health issues, symptoms, who are struggling with substance abuse, substance use, we are rightly very anxious. Anxiety is an insidious thing. It can be something that motivates us to change, but we suffer in our society in this day and age. We suffer with an excess of anxiety, which blocks creativity, which blocks executive functioning, which makes us less patient, less able to act from a place of agency, more reactive. I love one of Bessel van der Kolk's quotes. It says, who's a researcher in the field of trauma. He wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And he said, trauma comes back to us as a reaction, not as a memory. How you react to somebody in the grocery store would tell me more about your trauma than if you were just trying to imagine what happened to you. So the reason I bring that up is because it's our fear, our anxiety, if not spent or worked out somewhere else in our own support group with our own therapist and our own 12-step community fellowship. Anxiety not worked out in those other places it shows up in our parenting as a lack of creativity and forethought, a lack of resourcefulness. And the child experiences that anxiety, that what I'll call unowned anxiety of the parent. They experience it as something is wrong with me or I am bad at a visceral, unconscious, basic level. So the take home or the application for the field guides is slow down, make it less formal. Rather than lecture or ask questions, do something together, even if it's going to the grocery store. Even if you go to the grocery store and you don't ask questions, you may have contributed to the child's sense of safety more than anything you could have said. It's the mentoring. One of my favorite therapists in family therapy, Salvador Minuchin, he said the joining, the connection, he called it joining, the connection between client and therapist. That's the glue that holds therapy together. I said this to somebody recently. I'll get back onto the field guide in just a second, but I'm just reminded of this. I said to somebody, one of the luxuries of having children that are so far apart in age. I have a 30-year-old, a 28-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 15-year-old. One of the benefits of having such a spread of ages, I will tell you, when my 30-year-old child was 15, I thought he and half of his peers might end up in jail. Failures. Not graduating from high school, getting in trouble. Definitely not graduating from college. Definitely not having families and connected, healthy, rewarding relationships. And now today, my son and every one of his peers, every one of them that were around our house and getting in trouble with him, every one of them is beautiful, evolved people. Successful professionally, family, and some of them have children. I live in Utah, remember? So a few of them have children, more than one. That perspective of being able to see across 4 different children what it looks like on the back end helps me to reduce my anxiety with my 15-year-old. Also, the other thing to take home, people always ask me, what can you take from wilderness therapy? It's that the highs aren't really that high and the lows aren't that low. That the journey is the destination. and that our I don't know if I want to call it well intended. Our inclination as parents to control for outcomes is short sighted. And wilderness therapy, being a field guide, teaches you that whether you like it or not. The weather, the circumstances, somebody refusing to hike, somebody in conflict, somebody not feeling well. All of these things do very well to get in the way of your best laid plans. So slowing down, learning to not relax, I wouldn't say relax, but learning to take care of your anxiety somewhere else. Valuing the setbacks and the detours as much as the successes. Those are some of the lessons that being a field guide, learning how to be a field guide, a successful field guide, teach you that are applicable to parents. Like I said, they have ongoing training and stipends. These are passionate people who connect to kids. I love the counterculture. You know, one of the most important things that we can do as a parent. In fact, Alice Miller said in The Drama of the Gifted Child, my favorite book on what I think is the most important book on child development. She said, a parent, she said mother, but back in 1979, that's the way they talk. I'll say parent. She said, a parent who is not particularly nurturing can still give to the child what the child needs if only they will allow that child to get it from somebody else. And field guides are wonderful people. Like I've said before dropping your child off at the coach of the local, you know, your little league team or your little sports team, part of what you're saying is, I want you to have experiences with other adults. I want you to know that the lessons that I'm trying to teach you aren't local to me. They're not about me. They're about the way the world works, about the way the universe works. The separation that happens in wilderness and the fact that you're handing your children over to somebody else to take care of and to mentor for a while, that's great wisdom. I always say to parents, yes, I'm doing the daily labor. The staff are doing the daily labor. Really, they are. But you're kind of doing it because you've hired us to mentor and to teach your child. I remember when my son was in wilderness therapy. I've told the story recently once, and years ago I told it. It's been a few years since I told it more than once in a short period of time. My son was in wilderness therapy, and I was surprisingly heartbroken by it because I knew what this intervention was, but the hole that his absence left in my heart, even though I knew he needed to be there, was significant. And I had a student that was new to my program, new to my group, that was struggling, had tried to burn himself with a stick from the fire to get sent home. His father, who was on a service mission that he had saved for years and planned for years to go on. So he kept the appointment. He was over across the Atlantic Ocean doing some work over there, and he thought maybe I should come home now that my son is struggling. And I remember saying to him, here's the way it works. You help those children over there that you've trained for, that you've saved money for, that you planned and prepared for. You help them. I will help your child. And somebody's helping my child right now. And I think that's the most beautiful example of what's meant by the saying, it takes a village. And wilderness therapy is an extension of your village. And these field guides are these sort of young, accessible elders, if you will, that are trying to teach your children the very lessons that, for whatever reason, you've been unable to impart in them, mostly due to their resistance, their outright rejection of throwing you and everything you say out with the baby with the bathwater. Field guides learn as much as from the job as they give. Invariably. They will tell you that. They're clinically trained and supported, so they're not off on their own, although in real time, they have to solve problems. Young people that come to our program that are resistant to therapy can often connect to a guide more easily. They're less threatened by them than they are with somebody who looks and dresses and has the same amount of hair on their hair. The hairline is in the same position as their parents. This difference in their role provides a unique opportunity, in many ways more effective, more impactful than the actual psychotherapists themselves. Time is on their side. I love the time component. They come from diverse backgrounds with diverse interests. Some of them I haven't mentioned. At any given time when we've taken an assessment of our staffing, somewhere around a quarter of our staff are former students. It might not be true today, but over the years, it's a regular occurrence. And many of them are future therapists. I know at least 30 or 40 of the staff that I've worked with, that I've trained, have gone on to be therapists in their own right. Somebody asked the question, how do you determine if the field staff groups? That's a great question. Is it based on who can build rapport with certain clients or just availability? Our daughter told us that group blue is more strict than group green. There's always a good cop, bad cop dynamic. Can never get away from that. She has been there for 7 weeks and rarely seen the same staff member. Is inconsistent good? How do you determine progress each week for 7 weeks? The field guides have no ability to identify growth or regression from the previous weeks. It's a mix, really. We try to keep them consistent, but staffing needs, vacations, demand change. We do like changing staff over time. So the default is to try to have them come back when they can. To try to have diversity. To try to spread out the people that have strengths in different areas. So the default is consistency, but oftentimes you'll have an experience where you're having different staff, like your daughter's reporting. I'm not sure if it's true that she's never had the same staff even once, twice. Maybe not the same senior instructor, and maybe that's the case. So we try to have consistency. We also try to change it now and again, but most of the time it just changes due to individual needs. Somebody in this area is going to work in this group over here this week because they have a certain skill set, a certain need that staff and that team need. And that person's going to come over here. It could be gender-based. It could be, what I like about wilderness therapy is that it is both able to treat different populations of clients and that there's heterogeneity. I do like that in terms of the students. I like your student to be a higher level functioning child for a period of time in their group. And I like them to be a lower or a junior member of the group. I like people that are struggling with substances, dealing with people that are dealing with anxiety and self-harm, because that allows them to see that they're all the same. That while their symptoms or their defenses might present uniquely or differently, that the fundamental underlying issues are the same. So we shoot for consistency. We shoot to put certain students in certain groups that match up with certain therapists' strengths and approaches. But sometimes the nature of life just ends up being a lot of change. And yes, it's nice for some staff will see you on week 1 and week 5 and say, oh my gosh, look how much you've changed since I saw you. Sometimes you get that experience. But the 8-day shifts, like I said, that's what allows them to have a real consistent, seamless experience with your child, even if it's just one shift, for sure. And then, of course, the therapist is the golden thread woven throughout all the staff teams week to week. All right. I will go to our upcoming. Get your phones ready if you want to look on any of these QR codes. You just face your camera at the QR code and you click on the link that shows up in your camera for the respective web page for my upcoming announcements. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon or Audible. So you can get those there. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, aside from our wilderness program, completely independent of our wilderness program, we have a therapeutic intensive program. Finding You is our flagship program for adults looking to see how their past relates to their present challenges and struggles. March 22nd through 26th is our next offering. I don't know if I've said this in a long time. I've been to about 9 myself as a participant, somewhere else, of course, not our program. My wife has been to 2. All of my 2 adult children have been to 1. All of them by their own choosing, not because we required it at all. We've sent several of our staff and our therapists our senior staff and managers to intensive program. We believe in these. If you want to know what can you do, mom and dad, what can you do to make the biggest difference in your child's life, I would encourage you to do your own work, and Finding You is a great opportunity to do a deep dive into your own work to create a springboard into what is your work. And I'll be talking about what is your work in an upcoming broadcast. Or a therapy accelerator. If you're in therapy already, it helps to accelerate therapy. So March 22nd through 26th is our next in-person offering. March 3rd through 5th is our next online offering. Half the time, a third of the cost, done virtually. We also have a Returning to You that happens in October this year, October 11th through 15th. If you've been to a Finding You and you want to come back, Returning to You is that offering, October 11th through 15th. And then we're doing a Finding You weekend in the UK. If you want to make a trip, if you live in the UK or near it, and you want this work, we'll be making a trip out there June 23rd through 25th. Same location as we did the last time we were there, which was absolutely amazing location. Private property, mansion, out in the countryside, about an hour and a half outside of London. Absolutely beautiful. We have custom Finding connection intensives for couples and Finding Family for families. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com or go to our webpage. We have support groups, free support groups for current and alumni families. March 9th will be the next offering, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni parent only meeting support group. March 28th is that next offering at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And if you are an intensives alumni, March 14th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com. That's SARA, the letter D at evoketherapy.com, or go to our webpage and look at our family involvement section for more information. If you want an individual coach, a parent coach, a family coach, a couples coach that knows the Evoke method, the attachment-based method, here's a picture, a glimpse of our one of our 42 coaches working on clarifying boundaries, communication skills, parenting and family dynamics, wraparound services for families and children that are leaving treatment, reintegrating themselves back into the treatment, from the treatment setting back to the home environment. They can perform all of these kinds of services and support for you. Check them out. Go to our page or email coaching@evoketherapy.com. If you want an adventure experience for your family, customized anywhere from 3 to 30 days, anywhere in the world, including, of course, Southern Utah. We have a lot of guides and services and adventure in that area. My son, my 20-year-old, when he was 16, did a 30-day custom trip to the Dominican Republic. He helped paint an orphanage. He helped with animals at an animal shelter, and he also went on a deep jungle hike with a donkey, and he became scuba certified, advanced scuba certified, which was one of the barriers that he chose to overcome to meet a fear and get over it. You can contact intensives@evoketherapy.com for that. That's for families or young adults. My child was 16 because I own the program, so I could break the rules in that way. We ask all current families to attend 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Go to those websites. You can attend those support groups. They're free. You can attend them virtually, or you can attend them in person. There are not a lot of services that are free in this work, and those groups are free. They're great. And we ask you to try 6, any combination of them. See what you like. Each group is different. Each group has its own personality. You can also go to refugerecovery.org, which is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on higher power, and also the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, NAMI.org, have free classes and resources in most metropolitan areas close to you. You can go to get classes or resources or support. All these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You at Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com to listen on your computer. You can also go to Evoke's YouTube channel and listen there. You can follow Evoke Therapy Programs or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also follow the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has new content each week. If you want to give back to organizations, charities that help people that can't afford treatment, our 3 charitable partners include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or the Evoke Family Foundation.org. You can earmark your funds to go toward an Evoke program if that's something that you value, something that means something to you. All right, folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact for anyone listening. I hope it makes a difference for you. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up tonight and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening. Take care. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.